Hi there, my name is Neil Blevins, and this video is called Layer Breakdown, Shipjumper Poster 4. So I haven't done a layer breakdown video in a while, where I discuss how I made all the different layers that go into one of my more detailed paintings, or digital collages. So after finishing this image a few weeks ago, I decided it was a good opportunity to make one. So first of all, Shipjumper is an IP I've been developing for a video game pitch, inspired by all the giant robots of my youth, such as Goldorak, Tranzor Z, and the Transformers. I'm not sure if this will ever be an official pitch where I actually look for investors or anything, but regardless of where it ends up, it's a fun universe to make imagery for. Okay, so here we go. So this is the final image without the title, and let's just start going through these layers. So the very bottom one is the star layer, and I just start off with a black background. Add the stars in here, and this is a star field that I've probably used it for 30 years. It's just a very simple star field, and what I do is, you'll note here there is a mask, and the mask is just erasing a few stars that I don't want, which is something I won't know until I do the rest of the painting, but then I'll go in and edit out stars that kind of interfere with everything else. And then what I'll tend to do is I will go in with a levels, and in this levels you can see the results up here. I'm just taking the blacks and bringing them up here, making them a little bit brighter as well. And the key here is that I can control the amount of stars that are visible using this levels. So if I were to take this and I were to go like this, I could reduce the number of visible stars dramatically, or I could increase the visibility of the stars. So it's just a nice simple way of kind of changing not just the brightness of the stars, but in doing so also the number of stars that are actually in the image. Okay, the next one is the sun group. And the sun here, this is just a very simple sun that I painted. You can see it's got a little bit of glow with a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue in it. Then I used a bunch of soft brushes inside of Photoshop to paint the center part. And then for these lines here, what I tend to do is I tend to make a dot and then use, if you go up to filters and go up to blur, motion blur, I then motion blur the dot, and that creates these nice little streaks going in these different directions. And you can choose what direction the blur happens in, the motion blur happens in. And that is how I painted this little sun. Now let's move on to the planet, which is up here. And I'll bring it down to here. So start off, actually let me hide that one and put this one on. So I define the shape of the planet just by using the selection tool up here, the marquee tool, and then fill it with a color. And then on top of that, I put this NASA picture of the Earth. And one nice thing about the NASA images is that they're all, because they come from the US government, you can use them for free. So I don't always use NASA images, but for something like this, it was easy to take an actual picture of the Earth and put it here and define it based on a clipping mask onto where I wanted to place it, which was this shape here. Then a little bit of color correction on there to make it brighter. Make that part darker so that you didn't see the whole thing, which is just a soft brush painted in Photoshop on this layer. Then a little bit of brightness down here to accentuate that edge. And then this bottom one down here, that is the very soft glow around this edge. And that was just simply done by taking this layer here and then copying it and then applying a Gaussian blur to it to get that little edge. Okay, so let's now get into the meat, and that is the robot here, and following by the character and the hand. So these were all done in separate groups, and let me just go to the robot here, and you can see lots of layers here. Although, in all honesty, even though I do lots of layers, there's people who do way more layers than I do. They get into the thousands. But I'm just going to go through my particular process. So, as you probably guessed, this part of the robot is actually made in 3D. And so we'll go through that process right now. So here I am inside of 3D Studio Max, and yes, this is still 3ds Max. While I've been using Blender more and more these days, this model was created originally in Max a number of years ago, so it just made more sense to finish it off here, I felt, than moving it to Blender. Of course, there's nothing I did inside of Max that couldn't also be done inside of Blender when you're making your own robots or your own scenes. So anyway, I started off, of course, with a really simple sketch on a piece of paper, and then after that I made this pretty simple 3D model. You can see it here. And so the idea behind this is just to get the major proportions of the robot and make sure that it looks good, and there it is posed, just to give it a little bit of a Valiant pose, which you can see down here. And then I went ahead and rendered this out. So I took that render and then I printed it out, and then using good old traditional pen and ink, I went ahead and did a drawing of what the mech could look like, adding all the details. And obviously this is way more detailed than the version, the 3D version that I had previously made. But even this is not as detailed as the final mech was going to be. But here I explored all the shape language and how all the parts would go together and connect together. So did regular pen and ink for this, and then this one here I colored it in with some Copic markers. Then I scanned it in and brought it back into the computer. So then I went about adding more detail to this mesh to match the drawing that I did. And so I will just start turning on the high. Let's just go here, all the high-res stuff. And one thing that you will notice here is that I only added the detail that I needed for this particular painting. At some point I'd like to go in and do the full detailed model of this particular mech, but since really I only wanted to do the painting for now, I just added the stuff like the head and the chest and the torso and the upper arm that I needed for this particular painting. And I'll go in and add the other details at some future time. Maybe I'll do another poster or just do it as a full 3D model. So took this and then added very simple materials, just simple in terms of it would add, for example, a little chipping here and there, using the chipping technique I tend to use inside of Max, some very basic material of the white paint. This stuff is chrome, and then I rendered it out in V-Ray and then brought the end result into Photoshop. Okay, so we're back inside of Photoshop, and let's take a look at this raw render that we have here. So you can see the different metal materials down here on the CG one here. You can also see the little chipping effect happening at the edges, and this is a technique I use in 3D all the time. I'll put a link in the description of how to see the video on how I do this. But it's basically a painted metal where you got metal underneath, white paint on top with a little bit of grunge, and then here adding this little chip. So that's the raw render. Now let's look at the 2D stuff on top. So first of all, there's a little fix layer here, and this is just adding a few little things here and there. Like for example, for some reason, this area up here was rendering completely white, so I just put a little black in there. So just little small tweaks like that to make it better. Then I have a dirt layer, and this is just a, let me put it up to 100%. You can see this is just a grunge layer. I probably took this as a photograph from some sort of rusty piece of metal that I found, like a trash can or something like that. And then I applied it as a multiply and put it at a low value. So this just adds a little bit more dirt beyond the dirt that was already in the 3D render. Then as far as painted stuff goes, here is a few little yellow decals. And so for this, all I did was made a, here we go. I just added a hue saturation, and then the hue saturation I set to yellow, and then I did a mask, and the mask is the places that I want those little yellow strips on the surface. And in exactly the same way, here are the blue strips. So again, these could all have been done in 3D, but it was easier to do it in 2D for this particular thing. And if eventually I do the full 3D model, I'll go in and add these in 3D instead of at the 2D stage. So next, despite the fact that this is realistic lighting doesn't always make for the most exciting lighting. So I went in and added a few extra shadows here. So I shadowed down this area down below since the light is coming. There's kind of two light sources. There's one light source that's coming from up here, coming down, and then there's the light source here, which is going to be hitting the rim there. So one shadow there. This is just a simple layer with black at a 50%. Another shadow there, another slight shadow down at the bottom here, another shadow over this side, another one over on this side. So again, this is all about the artistic portion of the shadows. Before it was like, okay, we start with something that's realistic as far as what the light would actually do, and then here's me enhancing it with some manual shadows just to bring out the shape a little bit more of this particular robot. So two more shadows, one down there and then one down there, and you'll see why that one's there in a minute once I bring the hand in. And then adding some brightness. So a little bit of brightness down here, a little bit of brightness over there, and then from there I go into some more dirt. So in this case it's drips. So these drips are either hand painted, where I just take a soft brush and paint them in, or in this case, I believe these drips were actually from some scans I took of some real drips that were on a concrete wall years ago. So just bring those in and take off the parts I don't want with a mask, and that just adds a little bit of directionality to some of the dirt that's on here. And then this is where I do a lot of painted ones. So you can see right here, these are ones that I'm painting in Photoshop. So I'm taking a brush which has a little texture, and then what I tend to do is I paint the drip, and then I go in and erase out to create this finer tip that you can see. And these are placed all over the place. So you can see them, there's a couple here, a couple here, all really small, but they need to be small because this is supposed to feel like a giant mech. So if I make the drips too big, it'll fight with the overall scale of the piece. And then next is a speck layer, and this is actually a little bit like a kicker light. So if I could, again, have done this in 3D, where I added a kicker to add a little bit of rim lighting around the edge, but instead it was easier just to paint it inside of Photoshop with a white brush. And so this is just bringing out a couple of these edges. As an example, like you see up here, this is dark, and then the planet is dark, and so you don't see much separation between this and this. So it's nice to have that blackness there, but if I add this speck just at this edge, it helps bring it out from the background, so it's easy to see that there's something here. And even if this remains dark down here, it's okay, because the mind sees that lightness up there at that edge and kind of fills in the rest down here, knowing that this is one continuous shape, even though you don't have that light going all the way down to the bottom. So, yep, a couple more speck hits here on the chest things here. Lights. Oh yeah, this is just adding a couple of, anytime I add, pipes and that kind of thing, I like adding these little small glowing lights inside of the pipes to make it feel like there's a bunch of depth in there. There's maybe other glowing machinery all mixed in with the pipes. And even though technically some of these are like on top of the pipes, since you're never going to see it this close, it's going to be back here. It doesn't really matter. You can sort of place it in there. Then this is doing, oh yeah, there was one little area here that for some reason was turning kind of blue in the shadows, and I was noticing that it was looking a little strange. Again, it might be totally real in terms of, yeah, it would actually go blue there based on bounce light and whatnot in 3D, but it was detracting from the look. So I went in and I just did a hue saturation, brought the saturation down, and painted a little mask here just to get rid of that, to bring it more neutral. And then finally, the eye glow, and the eye glow was just a real soft brush around where the eye is. And then also here is a levels, and so I'll bring that over so you can see it. So this is crushing the blacks a little bit to give it a little more contrast, bringing the whites down. So again, this is all about just adding a little bit more contrast. It tends to be when I do a 3D render, it's not as contrasty as I like it, and so I tend to do this a lot, where I'll put a levels on there to add the contrast in 2D after the fact. And so the pilot was the only part of the image that I didn't make, and this was painted by concept artist Moo-Young Kim. So I worked with him at Monolith Productions many years ago, and since he's really good at human characters and I'm not as good at human characters, I thought it would be cool to do a collaboration and have him paint the pilot. So I gave him a concept brief and a super rough painting of the mech and environment so he could match the lighting, and then he really knocked it out of the park here. So see the video description for a link to his portfolio, because you really need to hire this guy. And I'll just go through this. I can't go through his painted layers because that's his work, but this is the original one that he gave me. And then to integrate it into the background a little tiny bit, I added a little bit of darkness on this side, and then added a little bit of lightness on this side. These are both with just big soft brushes. This one's set to multiply, and this one's set to overlay. Then added the tiniest bit of speck over on this side to make sure the hand broke out from the background. And then added a contrast here with his levels, same as the background, in order to make sure that these contrasts matched. And then down here, you'll note that there is a little bit of lightness, again painted with a big soft brush, and a little bit of darkness there. And that's just because I was finding that his legs against this background were merging in with the background a little bit too much. And so I made the background lighter just in that spot in order to make sure that you could see the legs against this the mech in the background. Okay, and now let's do the hand. And the hand was rendered in 3D as a separate render. Let me just turn these off. And so this was the hand as rendered out of 3ds Max with V-Ray. And then I went about doing a very similar process to the hand that I did for back here to add all the extra details. So this one here was a little model fix. I decided it looked more visually interesting to have it sloped up like this in this part of the hand. And while I could, of course, gone back into 3D and done that, I made this at kind of the last minute. So I decided it would make sense to just paint this detail in. And later on, I'll go into the 3D model and I'll fix that. So the next time I do a render of this guy, I'll have that automatically built in. So then a few little fixes here and there where I went in, added a few details, painted out a few things with just a regular hard brush. Then added the layer of dirt, just like the background here. Added some drips. Added a little brightness at the bottom. I was finding that this was disappearing totally into the background, and so you couldn't see where the hand ended down here and the stars began. So just went in and did a bright brush set to overlay. Then another little bit of brightness there. And then a little bit of brightness over here to make sure, again, that this also appeared as separate from the star field. A little bit of brightness on the top. Then a little shadow, core shadow down here. So again, you can see how I'm using shadows and light after the fact to do a little bit of relighting on this rather than doing it all inside of 3D. And then another little shadow there. This was seeming a little bit too bright and was, there wasn't enough contrast between here and here. So went in and darkened that. Darkened the fingers a little bit. You'll see here that even though it's realistic, the lighting hit these fingers and it's all sort of one solid. You can barely see that there's any difference between the different fingers here. So I went in and cheated that by painting in some darkness in there to give some separation. And then a little bit of darkness over there. Then, let's see, painted in a few extra panels here. So one there, added a little bit of a lip here in order to give the panel a little bit of 3D. This looked kind of flat, and so I added a tiny little beveled edge up here with some light to make it feel as though it's actually bumping out. Then went and added a little bit of extra chip paint around that edge there since it was entirely painted by hand. Then added more chipping here, so you can see like down here is the original 3D chipping, which is the same shader I used before, but it tended to sort of cut off at this spot, and again, I could probably tweak that in 3D, but it was easier just to go in and add those chips manually by hand in order to get that to work properly. Then went ahead and added a little bit of extra speck down here, so just simple shapes with a hard brush, and then used some marquee shapes to cut them down a little bit, just to really touch that edge and nothing else right in that spot. So again, on and off. Then this is the yellow, exactly the same as I did back here, to add a few decals, add a blue decal, and then once again the levels in order to add contrast to this to match it to the contrast of the background. Okay, almost finished. I have this optics layer here, and all this is I have these little glints that I place in areas that are really, really bright, which feels like, the light is hitting a tiny little bit of metal and it's making that little glint, which helps add to the realism. So one there, one up here, and one here. And you can go crazy with these. I usually add like 2 or 3 per painting. You could, of course, put tons of them in there, but I think just adding a couple just adds a little bit more visual interest in that feeling of it being real optics. Okay, so finally I bring this into a program called Magic Bullet Photolux. And unfortunately, this program is end-of-lifed, so you can't buy it anymore. Although you can still buy the Magic Bullet tools for After Effects, where you can do some similar stuff. And this is where I add stuff like a little more contrast, glows, a little bit of flare, that sort of thing. So you can still do all these things in Photoshop. It's just not as easy because this is a more procedural compositing type workflow. But still, nothing in here you can't do inside of Photoshop if you put your mind to it. So I'll just show you the different layers of things. So first tool here is diffusion, and this just adds a little tiny bit of glow to the entire image. This one here is the anamorphic flare, and this is what adds those. It takes the really bright spots and kind of flares them out in a horizontal direction. And this is a fun little thing, again, to make it feel a little bit more filmic, the final image. Then here is haze flare, which again takes some brighter parts of the images and adds a little bit of an extra flare to it, which is more omnidirectional than the anamorphic one here. Then edge softness, and what this one does is the area inside of here is completely sharp, and the area out here is blurry, and then it sort of goes off to blurry as you go off to the edge. And I find this is helpful just to sort of really focus the eye on the part with the details and take the parts that are towards the outside of the image and make them fade off a little bit by blurring them just a bit. So it's kind of subtle, but it's a nice effect that I really like. Then chromatic aberration, and this one is difficult to see unless you get close, but without it, it looks like that, and then with it, it looks like this, where you get these nice little halos, which happen from a lens that's actually broken. Most people, when they have a real lens in a real camera, they want to avoid these types of effects. But adding them as a post-process afterwards allows you to make it feel as though it's a little more filmic again, which is what all this stuff does. So then vignette. And the vignette, like the edge softness here, everywhere inside of here is full brightness. Everything here is whatever the brightness level is here, which in the case is 50%. And this is just a nice little way to, again, help focus the eye towards the center area by making it darker as it goes off to that edge. So last one's here, exposure. This is just a simple one to brighten it a little tiny bit before I add my main color correction, which is these curves. And here I'm just taking the blacks, again, crushing them a little more, bringing the blacks down to make it a little bit darker, taking the lights and making it a little bit lighter to increase the contrast. Then this tool here is just shifting the color a little bit, adding just a little bit of blue to the midtones and to the shadows. Here it is off and on. You can see the difference there, which gives it a little bit more of that blue, atmosphere, kind of outer space, cold feel to it, which I thought was good for this particular image. And then finally, a hue saturation, which is just bringing down the saturation a tiny bit so that the colors aren't too overwhelming and it is a little bit desaturated. Okay, so I export the result of that back into Photoshop, and so you can see the difference between before and after using Photolux. And then the very last thing, of course, is the logo. And the logo is a logo that I made myself a number of years ago for the IP. And I just found that the logo by itself, if I just put the logo there, of course, the white parts don't read very well against the light parts of the upper arms. And so I just put in a tiny little bit of darkness there, a little bit of black with a soft brush to give it a little bit of contrast. And then I also felt as though this black area was there was like light here, light here, light here, light down here, and this felt a little bit empty. So for this, I decided to add just a few little light streaks, as though there was like some bright light source down here streaking down, which I just did inside of Photoshop. I painted a couple of little white circles and then went in with the motion blur filter up here in under blur to then have these streaks come down. And there you go. So this is the final image. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video interesting. And if you want more videos about art-related topics, please go to neilblevins.com and go to the education section. Or if you want to be notified the next time I post a new video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.